Hello and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Jacqueline Dorsey of Lean Frontiers and I'll serve as your host today. I'm excited to bring to you a short webinar on Lean for Good facilitated by Bill Waddell. He is a consultant, speaker, and author and is the most widely read manufacturing blogger on the internet. This presentation is going to be made available to you right now to view and upload. So if you want to take a look at it, it will be available on your screen, but if you wanted to download it later, you can just click on the Handouts tab, which should be located on the right side of your screen, and click on the plus side in order to find it. So since our time is limited on this webinar, we will not be doing a Q&A session. Also, this will be recorded, so you can refer back to it later. And with that being said, I'm going to turn things over to Bill.
Well, thank you, Jacqueline, and good afternoon, everybody. I, more than most webinars, very much appreciate you taking half an hour out of your day to listen to me today. I'm going to give you a slant on Lean that might be a little different from the ones that you might have heard. And what I'm going to talk about today is hopefully something that falls more in the category of food for thought than food for action, at least in the short term. What we're going to talk about here today is really a subject that Jim Hunsinger from Lean Frontiers and I have found very interesting and very near and dear to our hearts, both figuratively and literally, since we've been involved in Lean and working together for the last 10 years or so. I want to start off by talking about a little bit of history. And some of you may not be aware of, but you should be, of an event 104 years ago when the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory in New York City caught fire. It's a momentous event because 145 workers died, of course, virtually all of them women that were involved in really what can't be described as anything other than a sweatshop. And obviously a tragedy in its own right. But it's significant because many of the laws and regulations governing workplace safety and the standards for manufacturing in this country can be traced back to the aftermath and the kind of national outrage that took place after the factory burned down. You know, the reasons for it burning down were typical sweatshop-y kind of things. Most of the exits were locked because they didn't want any employees sneaking out. The place was a fire trap because they have no regard whatsoever for cleanliness and 5S sorts of things, and rags and combustibles everywhere. One elevator working. And most of these women were making, by today's standards, about $3.50 an hour in today's dollars. Most of them were immigrants. Very few actually spoke English. So people understand a shirtwaist back in those days was a woman's top or a woman's blouse, just what they referred to as a shirtwaist. What's interesting about it, among many other things, is that we can fast forward almost exactly 1 century later. And 1 century later, in Bangladesh, the Tarzine Fashions Factory fire took place in the town of Dhaka. 117 women died. Virtually all of the same causes: locked doors, terrible working conditions. The women there were making even less. And it was a sweatshop by anybody's standards, and an equally terrible tragedy. But, you know, what makes this interesting is you need to stop and think about globalization. As a result of the Triangle Factory fire, we set moral and ethical standards for what we believe in the United States. That we certainly want low-cost goods. We want our factories to be competitive. We expect people to work hard. We believe in the free enterprise system. All of those things are good, and they're the driving principles of our economy. But at the same time, we said that anything doesn't go. We're not going to put up with child labor. We're not going to put up with abusive and dangerous factories. We're not going to have the fire exits along. We're not going to put people's lives and their health in jeopardy in order for us to get lower cost goods. And we agree on that as a people. At least we did. But now you take a look at what was taking place in the Tazreen Fashions Factory. It was largely making women's clothing. It was largely making them for American women. It was essentially the same product, the same markets. The only difference is that it was taking place in a country that doesn't have the same standards that we do. Well, American companies were the ones that bought and paid for it, and American customers were the ones that were using it. And we really need to think about what we mean and whether we have principles that we operate by. And when we say that we are not willing to have goods that the women in the New York City fire lost their lives to make, are we really saying that it's okay if women in other countries live in that environment? We've, in effect, through globalization, lowered the moral and ethical standards that American companies do business by in many cases. It doesn't have to be that way, but that's one of the outfalls. It's interesting that Pope Francis has had a lot to say that stirred up a lot of controversy, talking about Wall Street, talking about the environment, and when he said some particularly provocative things, Jeb Bush, among other Catholic politicians, immediately tried to distance themselves from the Pope. One thing that Jeb Bush said was, "I don't get my economic policy from my bishops or cardinals or popes." Basically saying money and business is one thing. Religion and principles and ethics are something different. And I don't believe that that's really quite true. If you read what the Pope said, and you read through his whole 50 or 60-page encyclical, it's a little bit discomforting. What he said was, where the stuff gets made in the world these days, in China and Southeast Asia, India and Bangladesh, and some of the third world countries, you'll find wretched poverty, you'll find shocking environmental destruction, and you'll find relatively low regard for human life. But all three of those things seem to kind of come together. It's not as though the environment is bad in one place and the working conditions and poverty are bad in a different place. They go hand in hand. And one thing that he pointed out was the places where those manufactured goods are used is pretty wealthy and pretty clean and pretty safe. And his concern was not for the environment, for some environmental reason. He wasn't citing the Greenpeace or anybody else. But he was saying that the destruction of our resources and the poverty and the abuse of people in this world seem to be in partnership. And he's concerned with what's happening with globalization. And basically what he said was that, and I'm paraphrasing using my own example of my own terms, but this is basically his bottom line, is that American companies make iPhones, and American employees working for Apple are very well compensated. American people get the use of this amazing technology that probably many of you have in your pocket or your purse or sitting there on your desk. American investors in Wall Street have done very, very well investing in Apple. If you go over to China, the corrupt local leadership has probably prospered quite well. But the people who actually make it have suffered greatly, are working in deplorable conditions, working for terrible wages, and China has become largely an environmental wasteland. And he's asking, don't all of the people who benefited in the form of having this fantastic product or making a lot of money on the deal have some responsibility for the conditions of the people who are actually making it? Where does the responsibility for the poverty and for the destruction of the environment lie? It certainly doesn't lie with the people who are poor. But somewhere among all of those other stakeholders, collectively lies some responsibility for the ethical and the moral implications of what we're doing in manufacturing. Now, it isn't really that easy to talk about manufacturing and profits without talking about purpose and values. And it kind of spills over into what we think of people and things like family. And it all falls over into our faith and ethics. And these things are pretty hopelessly intertwined. I don't find it quite as easy as Jeb Bush did. to say, well, work is one thing, and all of our values are another thing. And I suspect, in fact, I know, one of the things that brought Jim Hunsinger and I together in a lot of these discussions was the uneasy feeling of walking through the door to work on Monday and saying, this really has nothing to do with it. We should set aside all of those lofty values and goals and ideas that we contemplated and thought about over the weekend, wherever it is that we get our inspiration. A couple of weeks ago in Chicago, I had an opportunity to see the comedian Jim Gaffigan, the hilarious guy. And part of one of his routines is he says, I'm going to talk about Jesus. He does that, and he says, just to watch people squirm, because people are sitting out there saying, I don't want to hear about Jesus. I don't want you to talk to me about Jesus. And don't worry, that's not what I'm here to do today. But we can talk about religion and faith and values from just about any angle. Circle this back to lean. It's interesting if you go back to the founding precepts of Toyota, the core principles that the Toyota family built the company around way back in the early days, in the 1930s and really into the 1950s. They listed the 5 core precepts, the 4 principles around which the business was going to be built. And precept number 5, venerate the gods and Buddhas and live a life of gratitude and repayment for kindness. And you read that, and I don't understand Buddhism, and I don't understand a lot of religions, and I don't profess to be any sort of an expert. But what I do notice is that their spiritual principles were a driving part of how they put together the Toyota production system. In fact, if we take a look at that, don't even really have to tie it to church. You can draw your inspiration from the Ghost of Christmas Past, if you remember the Christmas Carol, when Scrooge and Marley were coming to terms with their past. And the ghost said, mankind was my business, the common welfare was my business. It's a universal principle. It doesn't matter where you go to church, or if you go to church at all, or if you go to a synagogue or a mosque, or you just got to commune with nature. We all have something within us that tells us what's right and wrong. And there's a lot of what's going on in manufacturing that rubs us the wrong way. What's remarkable about lean, and the core of all those conversations, all those discussions that Jim and I have shared over the years, and I've tried to document in my most recent book, is that the core principles that drive lean companies are in almost perfect alignment with the core principles of the world's great religions. And for that matter, you can find very specific examples, whether you're reading the Bible, the Quran, the Torah, whether you're listening to the teachings of the Buddha, or whether you're going to just about any ethical speaker, ethical source, that they align with lean principles. And that was probably the thing that drove Jim and I the most. But when you get involved with lean, you drive lean, you really understand lean culture, and you devote your career to it, you no longer have that uneasy feeling walking through the door about whether the work I'm doing is something that rubs the wrong way, whether I'm participating in environmental practices, whether I'm doing things to subsidize sweatshops, or even simpler than that, and more common than that, whether I'm doing the sort of thing that's declaring war on direct labor, or whether I'm doing the sort of thing that's causing people in my company to be laid off, and thinking that constitutes a good business practice. Because those are the sorts of things that tend to rub good people the wrong way. It's pretty hard at the end of the week to rationalize how you did well, how you spent your time, and how you devoted your career at the end of the week, when you look back and realize that directly or indirectly that you were supporting a management process that was causing, at the very least, unhappiness, financial problems, stress for the people around you and the people in your community. pretty hard to justify it. But with lean, you don't have to do any of it. In fact, you're doing quite the opposite. And that was the exciting part of lean. Now, we can be a little bit more specific. We talked about Toyota and being driven by their core belief in a particular branch of Buddhism. But the examples are all over. They come from a lot of different places. You look at the Barry Waymiller website. Barry Waymiller is probably the most successful lean culture in the United States, or at least the one that we're most aware of. Barry Waymiller is driven to these lofty heights, both financially and culturally, by a guy named Bob Chapman, who got his inspiration for the Barry Waymiller lean culture and his commitment to driving the company in those principles when he was sitting in church one day. And he agreed with everything that his minister, his pastor, was saying. And it occurred to him, it's too bad that this guy only gets to preach 1 hour a week to a couple hundred people. And his next thought was, you know what, I've got thousands of people captive every week. I can evangelize and preach more than them. And with that, the impetus for the Barry Waymiller system came together. That is remarkable in the street for human beings. And we'll talk about that a little bit. But if you haven't done it, I would strongly urge just about everybody to go to the Barry Waymiller website and read about their guiding principles of leadership and what the company is all about. What they don't say on the website is the fact that Barry Waymiller makes an awful lot of money and is a very successful company. And what they've done there, as Toyota has done, is put together a management and a cultural system that not only aligns how they manage with their core principles and their core beliefs, but one that takes the business to heights that the sort of folks that sent their stuff off to Bangladesh to be manufactured can't even dream of. Similarly, another lean company we hear quite a bit about is Aluminum Trailer. Another remarkable company. One that spends, Steve Brenneman at Aluminum Trailer spends most of his time figuring out how to get enough capacity to make all of the stuff that he sold. The business can be as big as he can stand to grow it. Enormously successful and an amazing place to work. Tremendous lean culture, tremendously good to people. Steve is crusading in the region for higher wages. He was recently quoted as saying he would be ashamed of himself if he found out that anybody who worked for him had to get public assistance, like many of the employees of the big Fortune 500 companies do. But it's not a complete coincidence. Steve is a Mennonite, went to Eastern Mennonite University, lives his life and drives his company based on the faith principles that are a big part of his core. And in lean, he found perfect alignment between what he grew up absolutely believing to be right and wrong with how to run a business. The Wall Clipper Company is another. Tremendous financial success. A great place for people to work. No layoffs in some 50 or 60 years. But when you get inside a wall, it's all about, from a personal standpoint, it's all driven by Greg Wall's Catholicism, what he believes. A lot of the money that comes out of the company, a lot of the efforts there are going into helping the local churches, the local schools, but it's a very family-oriented, people, principle-driven company. And the examples are right and left, and that was really the amazing thing, the coincidence that we determined really wasn't much of a coincidence that had Jim and I thinking that isn't it remarkable that just about all of the successful lean companies were driven by people and had a culture that was inherently good. It didn't come from one faith or any faith, but it had people driving it who were extremely principled people. And in lean, they found a way that they could manage the business in a way that didn't conflict with their principles. In fact, it enhanced and was supported by those principles. So part of our message here today is this quote from a guy who's in charge of production at a company called Westlaw Design, another extraordinary lean company out in Bozeman, Montana. that's an amazing place to work. And of all the different places, the lean companies with tremendous cultures, it's the one that my youngest son wants to go to work for. It's an exciting and fantastic place that does very well financially. But this quote from their production manager said that at Westlaw, my values are very much in sync with the company values, which makes our decisions feel good and helps me sleep at night, knowing we're doing what's best for our people, both customers and employees. He could have mentioned the community of Bozeman as well, too. They're big winners of what goes on at Westlaw. And the planet. And I also love the team I get to work with. You think about how many traditional companies can you find where people who are managing it say things like that. In fact, most, it's quite the opposite. They got a feeling that they need to spend a little extra time in church on the weekend to make up for some of the stuff that didn't feel so good that they needed to do during the week. Now, the bright line is fairly clear. But if you look at traditional management and the traditional culture, and I can give you some very specific examples. If you look at traditional accounting, and traditional accounting did things making life miserable for direct labor people, minimizing them, cutting short their careers, reducing the amount of pay they take home if they even keep their job. All of those things appear to be good in traditional accounting. In lean accounting, all of that's completely the opposite. It's holistic. You look at traditional organizations with their silos in departments that have people in conflict with each other, who have people trying to outdo each other, that are not unifying. They're divisive. You hear people talking about internal politics in traditionally structured companies. But in lean companies that are driven by the value stream, they're aligning people, they're bringing people together, they're encouraging people to work, be mutually supportive and mutually dependent on each other. All of the things that are the best part of ourselves. Lean principles, lean management is principle driven and is very much principle aligned. Traditional management, traditional accounting is quite the opposite. And it's a struggle to maintain being true to your principles and succeeding in a traditional management environment. To close with Barry Wehmiller again, if you listen to Bob Chapman, he makes it clear, and he's pretty evangelical himself. It's a little bit like listening to a fire and brimstone preacher sometimes. But what he points out that we all need to be aware of, and we are all painfully to be aware of sometimes, is that at some point in time, our lives are going to come to an end. And they put us in the ground, and someone has something to say about us. They're not going to talk about our profits. They're not going to talk about whether we made budgets. They're not going to talk about margins, productivity rates. Nobody's going to care about any of this stuff. All they're going to care about is how did we touch the people who were around us? How did we impact the lives of the people that we came in contact with? And as far as Bob Chapman is concerned, that's Barry Wehmiller's highest purpose. If they're not having a positive impact on the people that are touched by the Barry Wehmiller company, then there's no point in asking people to devote their careers to it. And he's right. You can't argue with that. And it makes it a wonderful place to work. And so you really have a choice. And the purpose of my book, The Heart and Soul of Lean Manufacturing, the clear message that I try to send is that if you're a senior manager, if you control the output of the structure and the strategy and the management of your company, then embrace lean principles. Go out and find a way to wrap your minds around lean management, lean accounting, the lean culture. And it will enable you to align what you do all day long with what's really in your heart and soul, what really is important to you. If you're working for some company, if you're down in middle management, give a copy of the book to the senior managers. Try and convince them. But if they won't, then get out. You don't need to put up with that. There are companies out there that you can go to work for, the Westlaws and the Barry Wehmillers, the Wall Clippers, and the ATCs, and Toyotas, that can allow you to bring the very best of yourself to work and can allow you to align the better angel of your nature with business decisions and find opportunities where where you can win on all fronts. Now, I've never in the past, and I've done a number of these webinars and spoken at a number of Lean Frontiers events, so I've never used it as a blatant way to peddle a book, but I'm going to do it this time. It's only $8. It's $5 if you get the Amazon version. It's only 100 pages. It's a quick read. If you can't afford the $5 or the $8, then send me an email. I'll send you a book. This is important, and it's important to us as individuals. It's a tremendous opportunity when you're exposed to Lean that you have to not just do something that's good for the business, but do something that's good for yourself, do something that's good for the people around you. And the more we can understand the power that bringing the better part of ourselves to work can have on every front, the happier we're going to be, the happier everyone around us is going to be, and the more successful our company's going to be. So apologize if I've gotten a little passionate, a little evangelical myself. This is very important stuff. It is an opportunity to further the conversation with any of you. If there's any I can help you learn more.
Bill, are you still there? Well, I think it looks like we might have lost Bill. So we'll try and get back with him, but it sounds like he was wrapping up his presentation. So we would just like to thank Bill for facilitating the session today. But before I close, I would like to draw your attention to the screen. So we will be launching a new Lightwise webinar series for 2016, and we wanted you to be the first to know about it. So please visit www.lightwise.me and submit your name, and we can keep you posted so you can find out what's coming up next. Also, don't forget to register yourself and your team for our first ever Lean Leadership Week. Lean Leadership Week is made up of 3 events during the week of October 5th, and all taking place in Jacksonville, Florida. So to wrap up, as mentioned previously, today's webinar is being recorded. So look for an email following our time together for a link for the recording. Feel free to share this throughout your organization. So again, thank you, Bill, for facilitating our session, and thanks to each of you for participating in today's session. Goodbye.